21, S-238.
Senator Galvez.
Honorable Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time.
Il est proposé par la sénatrice Galvez, appuyé par la sénatrice Pate, que ce projet de loi soit lu pour une deuxième fois en débat. Sénatrice Galvez.
Peux-je vous demander une précision, Madame la Présidente? Est-ce que je peux vous demander une précision au sujet de à 7 heures, vous allez m'arrêter, c'est ça?
Alors, je vais me lever à 7 heures pour demander si on voulait voir l'horloge. Alors, si vous n'avez pas terminé votre discours, vous allez pouvoir poursuivre par la suite, dépendant quelle sera la décision de vos collègues.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Honorable colleagues, I rise today to speak to Bill S-238, an act to enact the Climate Aligned Finance Act and to make related amendments to other acts. I will call it CAFA for short. Before addressing the bill, I would like to share the personal and professional motivations that led me to develop it. As many of you know, I worked for over 40 years as civil engineer and environmental researcher, designing water treatment plants, remediating contaminated sites, closing mining sites, assessing climate risk to urban infrastructure. I have witnessed firsthand the tremendous financial, social, and ecological cost of failing to care for our environment. But science and technology are not my only reasons. I grew up in Peru, as you know, between the Pacific coast and the Andes, very close also to the jungle, and some of my most cherished memories are of trekking with my grandmother in the jungle, a wise woman who lived close to the rainforest on the edge of the Amazon. I assisted her during the miracle moments of childbirth. This morning, somebody asked me at what time I witnessed my first childbirth with my grandmother. I was 13 years old. This deepened my profound respect and awe for life and for the natural process that sustain it. Today, when I trek around Canada boreal forest, I greatly admire the mighty rivers of northern Quebec, I feel the same reverence for the natural beauty of my adoptive country. I have worked in and visited every province and every territory, including multiple journeys above the Arctic Circle. I know deeply that humans are inseparable from nature. We need clean water, clean soil, not only for our physical survival, but for peace, dignity, and long-term prosperity, as my dear friend Senator Bury just explained to you. It is an honor to sponsor this bill in the Senate. We, as Canadians, are extraordinarily fortunate to benefit from an immense wealth of natural resources. With this privilege comes heavy responsibility. Canada's long-term economic stability, prosperity, and competitiveness depend upon our ability to protect and steward these resources through a robust, coherent, nature and climate-aligned financial framework. We have the tools, we have the capacity. Through this bill, we could have a clear legislative pathway. Many of you will recall that in the 44th Parliament, I introduced a similar bill after identifying serious gaps in Canada's climate strategy and sustainable financial architecture. These gaps were documented in a white paper entitled Aligning Canadian Finance with Climate Commitments, developed in collaboration with researchers from the John Molson School of Business at Concordia University and informed by dozens of consultations with more than 100 worldwide experts in sustainable finances, climate risk, indigenous governance, and public policy. Now, Bill S-238 retains the core intent of its predecessor, but incorporates 3 key amendments, reflecting the testimony and the feedback that we received at committee. I will return and I will explain these 3 amendments. However, I will start by briefly outlining the purpose and urgency of CAFA. The bill enables the alignment of the federal financial institution and federally regulated entities with Canada's legally binding climate commitments. It also provides practical implementation mechanisms for several acts already adopted by Parliament, including, and we passed it, the Canadian Net Zero Emission Accountability Act, the Sustainable Jobs Act that was sponsored by our colleague Yusuf, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, the Act to develop a national strategy on environmental racism and environmental justice. This in addition of the international commitments with the United Nations Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. In essence, CAFA is an accountability and implementation framework that gives real economic effect to laws that we have passed that have already received royal assent. CAFA offers a framework that sustainable finance experts and regular citizens have been asking now for more and over a decade. It should not be a surprise, therefore, that the ENVI committee in the other chamber just a few days ago revealed its report on sustainable finances, and the first recommendation is to adopt this bill. So if you are wondering what is the support that I have in the other chamber, well, I think these reports and the press release that they publish are proof of their interest in this bill. We also have a letter started by the Citizen Climate Lobby that has received recently, just a few days ago, and it's already more than 1,000 signatures. Globally, leading financial institutions and international bodies now recognize that climate risk is a financial risk. This is acknowledged by the Financial Stability Board, the Network of Greening the Financial System, the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, the Investor Network on Climate Risk, and also by an organization that we all respect, the OECD, to which Canada is a founder member since its inception in 1960. Here in Canada, both the Office of the OSFI, the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, and the Bank of Canada have explicitly recognized the existence of both the physical and the transition risk associated with climate change. Physical risks include damage from floods, wildfires, extreme heat, storm, and sea level rise. Events that impair assets, disrupt supply chain, increase insurance losses, and undermine credit worthiness. In recent years, we have communities devastated, families displaced, homes destroyed, business closing for good, crops and cattle tragically lost. In that sense, I really want to thank other committees of the Senate that have started several studies on the impacts of climate change, the Transport and Communication, the Agricultural Committee.
Sénatrice Galvez, je regrette de vous interrompre. Honorable Senators, it is now 7 o'clock, and pursuant to the Rule 3-31, I'm obliged to leave the chair until 8 o'clock. And we will resume unless it is your wish, Honorable Senators, to not see the clock. Is it agreed to not see the clock? Agreed. Sénatrice Galvez.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Transition risks arise from economic, technological, and policy shifts required moving to a low-carbon economy. These include stranded assets, sudden de-evaluation of carbon-intensive investment, and financial market instability. Because these risks are global and are interconnected, they do not remain confined to individual companies. They propagate through banks, insurers, pension funds, capital markets, government budgets, and households. Unchecked, they threaten the stability of our whole financial system. Multiple credible sources have made clear that if Canada fails to align its energy and financial policies with the global low-carbon transition, the risk of stranded assets, massive economic losses, fiscal collapse in fossil fuel-dependent regions, and financial sector instability will become, unfortunately, a tragic reality. While I speak often of technical and economic risk, we must not forget the human dimension: health, social rupture, and eco-anxiety. These are real, and please do not take my word for it. Ask your children, ask your grandchildren. I myself, I consider I am a very strong person. Yet, when I'm asked by young people, what is the point of getting married? What is the point of getting children? And these are not invented questions. These are questions that I have received being a professor at the university here in Canada from Canadian students. What is the point of building roads or pipelines if the future is collapsing? This is real eco-anxiety, and I'm shaking to my core. We have been fortunate to live under a relatively stable climate and predictable weather in a relatively stable economic system. I believe that every one of us in this chamber hopes that our legacy will be a world where future generations breathe clean air, drink fresh water, and live with hope rather than fear. We do not want them to worry about their home flooding, their retirement savings vanishing, or their health deteriorating. This bill addresses important gaps in the finance sector and offers solutions based on accountability, transparency, and promotion of innovation and competitiveness. CAFA establishes a clear framework to guide the financial sector to mitigate this climate risk. We have many other several risks, and the financial system responds to these other: cybersecurity, safety, inflation, and they react. But climate risk is not yet in the radar of some of our financial institutions, and should be, because of some of the information I'm going to give it to you today. We need to redirect capital towards adaptation and increase resilience. We need to diversification towards low-carbon economy, and we have to report transparently on progress. Under CAFA, to be considered aligned with climate commitments, federally regulated financial institutions must ensure their activities are consistent with the legally binding Paris 2015 Treaty to combat climate change, aiming to keep global warming well below 2 degrees. I'm sure you know that we have passed the 1.5 degrees, and we are just tasting what it may happen. Last year, we spent $9.1 billion in insured losses. So this requires accounting for finance emissions, reducing exposure to activities that degrade carbon sinks, and planning for an orderly phase down of fossil fuels. At the same time, it encourages increased capital flows toward biodiversity protection, ecosystem restoration, clean energy, and climate-resilient infrastructure, all grounded in best available science, technology, existing technology, respect for indigenous rights, and the protection of present and future generations. To operationalize this alignment, CAFA introduces 7 essential measures. First, it established a clear duty for directors, officers, and administrators to act in alignment with climate commitments. It introduces harmonized disclosure requirements, standardized transition plans, and annual reporting, replacing fragmented voluntary practices with a cohesive, enforceable framework. Second, it aligns the mandates of federal financial entities and strengthens the oversight role of the Office of the Superintendent Financial Institution to reflect climate-related financial risk. Third, it requires federally regulated institutions, crown corporations, and federally governed sectors, such as railways and airlines, to develop climate-aligned transition plans, emissions target, and annual progress report covering emissions across their value chain. Fourth, it strengthens governance by requiring climate expertise on certain boards and mandating disclosure of conflict of interest. This brings climate competence into corporate decision-making and modernizes fiduciary duty for a climate-constrained world. Fifth, it requires OSFI to consider capital adequacy requirements that reflect climate-related microprudential and macroprudential risk. This is essential. When financial actors continue to fund non-transition ready activities, unfortunately, they generate systemic risk that is currently externalized and paid by us, all taxpayers, public funds. CAFA introduces the conditions for those risks to be properly internalized. Sixth, it mandates a government action plan to align financial products, not just individual institutions, with climate commitments, recognizing that real alignment requires federal coordination. Finally, seventh, it establishes recurring public review process to ensure transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement. CAFA mandates accountability and transparency. These are the principles that are essential in any democracy. Politicians are elected based on platform, and it's expected that they keep their legally binding engagement. It's our role as senators to hold the highest standard on both, on transparency and accountability. So CAFA is prudent, forward-looking risk management, just as the Net Zero Emission Accountability Act applies to the government. CAFA extends accountability to the financial system regulated by the federal government. CAFA reflects indigenous people's rights on economic and finance inclusion, making effective this promise. We make this promise to indigenous people, that a stronger nation to a nation relationship, a meaningful indigenous equity and participation. This is our promise to them. So this bill in the preamble recognizes the disproportionate impacts of climate change on indigenous people. It defines climate expertise to include indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. It requires respect for rights that are affirmed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and ensure that indigenous perspectives directly inform national financial policy. Honorable colleagues, today we need CAFA more than ever. It actually influenced my decision to resubmit CAFA, because it's always, there is always the conversation with the executive, with the government in place, and they know that the clock is ticking. But I realized, some things move slower, and we need to accelerate the pace. And after consultations, new consultations, I realized that I had to submit it again, and that I had listened to the testimony and to some of the concerns of my colleagues. Traditional financial models are backward-looking. Somebody asked me recently, how do you explain this issue with climate change and the changes that it's making? And I said, it's like we are going in a tortuous road at 150 kilometers, very fast, and we are looking into the rear mirror instead of looking in front. And the reason is because it's so tortuous, it's difficult, and we think that historical data is going to help us predicting the future. We cannot do that. So, traditional financial models are backward-looking. They fail to incorporate abrupt and irreversible shocks. As a result, markets systematically underestimate climate risk. So, the bill corrects this failure. It enables an orderly transition rather than a chaotic collapse, because without urgent action, make no mistake, dear colleagues, collapse is in the trajectory we are now. And we can separate, and we can say affordability is this, and climate change is this, and safety is this, but in reality, we all know that it's the same the same source. The root are the same. The climate crisis threatens the financial system, and misaligned financial system accelerates the climate crisis. This is the reality of what the expert in financial call the double materiality. When financial institutions assess both how climate change affects them, outside in, and how their activities impact planet warming and the environment, meaning inside out, they realize both present real-world financial risk. This is double materiality. For example, a bank's mortgage portfolio faces physical risk from more frequent floods, outside in, affecting the real estate value and the loan performance. The same bank lends to coal expansion, creates transition and environmental impact, inside out, contributing to emissions that raise the systemic climate risk. So it's like sort of a vicious circle. Consideration of this double materiality ensures decisions reflect both financial resilience and responsibility towards our climate outcomes and commitments. Every additional degree of warming has devastating economic consequences. Research suggests that even 1 point of additional Celsius degree of warming may reduce global GDP by more than 20% in the long term. Canada continues to experience a sharp rise in catastrophic weather events. The number are increasing, the costs are increasing. The Canadian Climate Institute estimates that disaster already consumed the equivalent of 5 to 6% of our annual GDP growth. Insured losses have doubled in 5 years, from 10 billion to 20 billion. And in 2024 alone, insured losses reached 9.2 billion. Now, those are only the insured losses. What about the uninsured losses? Well, they are 3 to 4 times higher. And they are borne by government, by business, and us, the families. These are not abstract numbers. There are Canadians' homes, livelihoods, schools, and communities. These catastrophes are also straining government finances. One of my typical questions in the Financial Committee, National Financial Committee, is, have you put aside money for next year extreme weather event costs? And the answer is no. So I don't know how we are doing this. The Parliamentary Budget Officer now warns us that disaster assistance alone average 1.8 billion annually, and is rising. And yet, Canada continues to fall behind. Since 2018, we have produced 9 climate strategies, yet we remain the only G7 country that has failed to meet a single climate commitment or to decouple economic growth from emissions. The Climate Action Tracker notes that Canada's progress is stalling, even as we endure 2025, one of the worst wildfire periods in our history. And this afternoon, I met with a lady coming from Fraser River Valley who said, Lytton. And she said, I'm living in the warmest place in Canada, and my whole environment has changed because the land has burned so much. Nothing that is coming back looks the same as it was before. Several studies, including published peer review published in Nature and Energy, tell us that half of the fossil fuel assets may become stranded by 2036 in a net zero scenario. Those who fail to pivot will face collapse. Those who lead will seize the opportunity. In the meantime, 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries have now been breached, indicating that the Earth system, which support our life, and I'll make this parenthesis, if we let go all the biodiversity loss, climate change, plastic in the acidification of the ocean and plastic pollution going on unchecked, well, the planet will survive. That, I hope you are sure of that. The planet will thrive. It's us, it's humans, that will have to adapt or do something, I don't know exactly what. So these 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries that have now breached are destabilizing economies, life. You have to, I'm sure you go to the Caribbean for the wintertime. Well, I suggest you ask about erosion. Nations, islands, countries are very much impacted by global warming. So this confirmed that states have binding legal obligations to protect the climate system. Climate leadership is not longer optional. The risks are catastrophic, but the solutions, and this is what is the positive part of all of this, is that the solutions are within reach. We are seeing in the world other jurisdictions that are moving ahead. Nobody is going to stop the transition, not even our neighbor in the south. Financing the transition can help Canada manage risk and regain leadership. Every dollar invested in adaptations or in mitigation returns between $2 and $10 in avoided losses per decade. Ensuring that our financial institutions fully understand and address climate risk will allow Canada to transition in an orderly, just, and economically beneficial manner. This transition is not only it's not a burden. Actually, it's an extraordinary opportunity, but we need to open our eyes. So this brings me to the 3 amendments made to CAFA. First, the capital weighting provisions were refined. Rather than telling OSFI, and this I heard it in the committee, rather than me telling OSFI, you should do this, I will let OSFI study and evaluate and incorporate the climate risk while preserving its independence in determining technical calibrations. Second, the Board of Governance rules were revised. Instead of barring certain individuals, the bill now requires full disclosure of conflict of interest and the publication of mitigation measures if needed, ensuring transparency without imposing unusual statutory prohibitions. Third, the fiduciary duty of directors was clarified. Actions taken to align with climate commitments are now explicitly deemed consistent with existing statutory duties. This reduces legal uncertainty and reinforces that climate alignment is fully compatible with fiduciary responsibility. These amendments make CAFA more precise, more implementable, and more resilient. Honorable colleagues, CAFA is also a nation-building instrument. It strengthens unity by directing capital toward shared national priorities, such as modern clean electricity grids, interprovincial cooperation, and resilient infrastructure. It boosts competitiveness by preparing Canada for carbon border adjustments. I'm sure you know our Prime Minister is going around the world trying to look for new partners. Well, these new partners, where he going, to Europe, to Asia, to China, have stricter climate rules, have carbon border adjustments. We don't have that. So how are we going to compete? How are we going to get these markets? Clean technology raises an international investment flow that increasingly favor low-carbon economies. CAFA advances reconciliation by protecting lands, health, and communities while encouraging indigenous energy, conservation, and restoration projects. It replaces empty targets with measurable outcomes by aligning money with real-world emission reductions. And it supports affordability. Renewable energy, once built, offers a stable, predictable, and low operating cost. Of course, we need a storage of this electricity, but we need to develop this innovation, these new batteries. Around the world, we talk about a resource-curse economy. And it comes with it relentless global price volatility that perpetuates the boom and bust cycles. So a transition to clean energy inherently is stabilizing and disinflationary. In 2025, global energy investment is projected to reach $3.3 trillion, of which $2.2 will go to clean energy. China alone represents more than a quarter of that investment. The world is moving. Last year, only last year, 1.2 trillion were investment, new investment, went to clean technology and clean energy. Now, the question that you should ask, colleagues, is how much Canada received out of that 1.2 plus trillion that was available? Don't ask me that question because it makes me cry. Young people, scientists, indigenous nations, workers seeking a just transition, health professionals, women, and vulnerable communities are demanding decisive actions. They are not asking for rhetoric. They are asking for structural change. In this chamber, you and me, we carry the hope that our grandchildren will know the health, a good health of our planet that determines the fate of humanity, and that we did a good job and we were at the right side of the history. My north remains very clear: to work tirelessly for a world in which pristine environments are recognized as rights and protected for generations to come. Bill S-238 is a balanced, technically sound, transparency and accountability response to that call. It's very cheap because it's a Senate bill. Remember, it's a Senate bill. We cannot move money. So we have to be very creative. We have to be very innovative, legislatively speaking. So I look forward to a robust debate and thoughtful study of this bill in committee. And I more than welcome expert testimony. I want to hear, I want to learn, and I want to improve the bill. We need critical analysis. We need constructive criticism and constructive improvement, because the stakes, which is our stability, prosperity for us and future generations, could not be higher stake. Merci beaucoup, messieurs, mes collègues, mes chers collègues. Thank you so much. Miigwech.